Gentle viewers and gentlemen viewers, good morning, good day or evening, wherever you are. This is Jim Amalia from Portland, Oregon, with another edition of Shakespeare Views on the News of January 2026. A Tale of Two Cities is a historical novel by Charles Dickens set in London and Paris before and during the French Revolution. The novel is famous for its opening lines, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." The arbitrary parallel with the Tale of Two Cities and the Tale of Two Trumps in current America is unauthorized, yet I would say almost dramatic, as I will attempt to show in this episode of the program. The two Trumps in question are, respectively, Donald Trump, current President of the United States, and Mary Trump, his niece and daughter of Donald's older brother, Fred Trump Jr., who, Fred Trump Jr., was expected to take over the running of the original Trump Sr.'s real estate empire. According to Mary, Fred Trump Sr. was a sociopath, a factor that had a fairly negative impact upon all of his five children. Fred Trump Jr., as the oldest of the five children, had all of the father's expectations placed on him. Fred Trump Sr. was also a sociopath, as I said, I repeat, according to Mary, and this was something that had a negative impact upon all of his five children, including Fred Trump Jr., that is, Mary's father. For various reasons, Fred Sr. found Fred Jr. wanting, not adequate to the task of running the family real estate business, and not therefore the person wanted to succeed him, that is, to succeed the father. Fred Jr. was not deemed to be tough enough for the task, whereupon Donald became then the emperor of the enterprise at the age of 24. Fred Jr. continued his employment with the firm in a secondary role, but to all intents and purposes his working life was practically over. The demoted role of Fred Jr. in the family directly impacted also Mary's role. And also, says Mary, "I was a girl, and they were all misogynistic. Even the women in the family were misogynistic. Consequently, nobody cared." From now on, and just to make sure, I will stress that in this narrative, in this video, all observations about Donald are the observations of Mary, his niece, and not mine or of anyone else. After being demoted by his father, Fred Jr. started drinking. His health deteriorated rapidly, and he died at the age of 42. And from that time onward, the rest of the family were very cold, both towards Mary and her sister. Their mother had long divorced from Fred Trump Jr., and through the following generations, the effects of the way Mary's grandfather's sociopathic character, the effect of his character, were quite clear. As far as Donald, says Mary, if he were a patient of a clinical psychologist, and if he were willing to go through a battery of tests in order to be diagnosed, the results would indicate an antisocial personality disorder coupled with a narcissistic personality disorder. People carrying these traits are very comfortable in breaking the rules, people who play hooky, people who lie a lot, and people who think that the general rules, do not apply to them. They know the difference between right and wrong, but they just do not care. And as one proceeds along the continuum of personal characteristics, things get more serious and darker. And at the end of the metaphorical line characterizing an antisocial personality, there is psychopathy or sociopathy. Now, as far as rules not applying to them, here is one anecdote. The point in this short extract from a TV interview recorded quite some time ago is not so much about rules as maybe, at least this is my point of view, is quite a bit about discretion. The interviewer asks Trump, "What is the best thing in being Donald Trump?" And Trump replies, literally, as you will see in the sketch,
"The best thing about being Donald Trump right now."
Well, other than the fact I'm married, okay?
Right.
And I'm very happily married, I have a great wife. But if I weren't married, I'd be able to get all of the girls I want, except for possibly Robin.
Do you think you could now be banging 24-year-olds?
Oh, absolutely. I have no trouble.
Would you do it?
I have no problem.
Incidentally, the man who introduced Trump to his current wife is a man called Paolo Zampolli, famous for importing underage young girls from Eastern Europe as models and displaying or using them in his Kit Kat club. Now, Kit Kat for a nightclub is a name of which the old Romans would have said nomen omen, a term, nomen omen, signifying that the name of itself describes what it means, and what it means is better left unsaid. Apparently, Paolo Zampolli, you can see in this picture, has moved up from the importation of underage girls from Eastern Europe as models, and now this is not a joke, he is the U.S. Special Envoy for Global Partnership. And I can see online that this is a position he has been occupying from 2025 and now through 2026. But let us return to Mary Trump and her observations on her uncle. Her observations are extracted from a long interview that she gave in London sometimes during 2024. And according to Mary Trump, Donald Trump continues to exist, and I quote, in the dark space between the fear of indifference and the fear of failure. And in trying to understand Trump, there is much more than just understanding his politics. This is, as I said, Mary Trump. In her 2022 book, Mary wrote, "I cannot let him destroy my country." And in trying to explain the mental position of Donald, Mary believes that he hasn't any. He is a man without an ideology. And she, quoting, "an instinctual creature who does what he does to get what he needs or wants." Attempting to understand what drives him, his psychological makeup matters because that's how we figure out how to deal with him. Again, I say, Mary says this. If we understand his insecurities as psychopathologies, a reflection of his unconscious processes, then we know how to confront him. Understanding her uncle means understanding his insecurities, which in turn are connected to his fear of failure. I'm quoting, "If we understand that those are the things that drive him, then those are the points of weaknesses. If we understand that one of the things that he's most afraid of is being found out to have people understand that everything about him that's projected publicly is based on a myth, then he's literally nothing of who he claims to be." Again, I keep repeating, this is Mary's position observations. He is nothing other people have purported him to be, starting with my grandfather, who is the man responsible for having created this myth, in order to protect his psyche, in order to protect his extraordinarily fragile ego. He has to project this idea that he's the greatest, he is the best, and he's always using or beginning with hyperboles. The point about hyperboles is interesting and anecdotally significant. Quite recently, Trump commented on television that Jews and Muslims have been at each other's throat for 3,000 years. Of course, he was using what is called a hyperbole and was somehow stretching time to make the point. Yet the irrelevant rest of us may take the liberty of pointing out to Donald that the Muslims only started in the 6th century AD, whereas the quoted pronouncement implies that the Muslim religion began 2,600 years earlier. But going back to Mary Trump, she continues, "I do continue to think that the best weapon against Donald Trump is mockery, and just revealing of all those weaknesses, because otherwise he's going to continue to get away as he has now for decades with everything he has done with impunity, and shockingly, He is now much more powerful and protected than he ever was. He is literally got a following of sycophants and enablers around him, making sure that the reality about him, his bad poll numbers, for example, or the fact that people think that he is an idiot when it comes to the economy, or just a failure all along these different dimensions, they are protecting him from that knowledge, just as he so desperately tries to protect himself. Incidentally, there is an undertone of tragicomic sarcasm in all of this. The recent idea of stealing Greenland from Denmark and annexing it to the United States apparently is not his. A quick search on the mainstream search engines will show that the idea about annexing Greenland to the United States is not of Trump, but of two billionaires, the creed and allegiance of which I shall therefore forbear to mention, but you can find online independently. However, that Trump's geographical awareness of Greenland is, or maybe somewhat uncertain, was demonstrated when, at least in two occasions, he referred to the annexation of Iceland instead of the annexation of Greenland. Or maybe Trump intends to annex both Iceland and Greenland. In any way, in this case, good luck to both of these islands. To the question as to how was Trump when he was younger, Mary replies, "He's the only person I know who is incapable of evolving. He's never changed. He is, and he is also the same in every situation, which is also an alarming thing to say about an adult human being." And Mary repeats a few times that Trump was always a bully. When we were in the backyard playing baseball, she says, I was 6 and he was 28. I don't remember exactly. But in his late 20s, he would still throw the ball as hard as he could at me. Once I thought I broke every single bone in my hand. Because he has to win, he has to be better, and so forth. So he's always been that guy. But Mary Trump wants to be fair. There were times when he actually did me a favor or whatever. When I was in my early 20s, he hired me to write his second book. So we did spend a bit of time together, and he has his own charms. You would probably not find him charming. Most people don't, but there is a particular kind of person who gets sucked in by it. Mary tries to be objective. There were times when he did me a favor. When I was in my early 20s, he hired me to write his second book, so we spent a bit of time together, and he can be charming. Most people won't find him charming, but there is a particular kind of person who gets sucked in by it. There was also a time when there was this very small spark of kindness in him, when he had an impulse to be kind, but that became eradicated because it didn't serve my grandfather's purposes, and therefore it didn't serve Donald's. One hallmark of sociopathy is that sociopaths are really good at finding other people to use towards their own end. And that's kind of the way Donald evolved, and he's never changed. Mary Trump concludes this section of the interview by saying, in terms of any good impulses that he ever has had, those are gone. And he has no redeeming characteristics anymore. And I think that he is dangerous. Mary Trump is pessimistic and concludes quite pessimistically, he doesn't know why and what he is doing. Things like imposing tariffs because he doesn't understand how they work, and is an example, and this has a real impact on our future as Americans, who we are as a people, who we are as a country, but it also has a very deleterious impact, not just on our country, but on our standing in the world. After having unloaded some other negative comments that I prefer not to repeat here, Mary concludes, it is very difficult to understand that he, meaning Trump, does have a certain charisma, and that's why the Republicans have hung on him, because there is literally nobody else in the Republican Party that could draw the kind of support he continues to draw. The interview continues for quite some length, but I reported the essentials, and I think they offer a pretty accurate view of the Trump observed by his niece and of the Trump observed by the rest of us. The Trump described or observed mirrors quite accurately a certain quintessential hero of the old Western movies, in which movies, at times, a woman is allowed to make an observation on matters vaguely spiritual or about nature or similar. In these scenes, the protagonist is usually standing up with the glass in his hand and maintaining a half-smiling expression, indicating that is woman's talk, to be listened to with some complacence, but really not something worthy of the macho man. A character, the macho man, that, with minor modifications, perfectly fits the Trump whom his sister describes and speaks about. Now, apart from the observations of Mary Trump, Donald Trump's so-called machismo is equally reflected in his general relationship with numbers. One aspect of his narrative when handling numbers, and especially percentages, is that quite often his quoted percentages start from 100% upwards. For example, this or that program has improved by 100%, or we will improve 100% tariffs, or similar. It is perhaps possible to conclude that Donald Trump has a personal and particular relationship with numbers, which brings to mind a line by Shakespeare in The Taming of the Shrew. Nay, by St. Jamie, I hold you a penny, a horse and a man is more than one, and yet not many. As a concluding observation, and quite apart from Donald Trump and from the impassable chasm, I would say, that separates him from his niece, our current times are clearly times of extremes at large, and not only linked to Donald Trump. To demonstrate the point, and clearly in a totally different tone, here is a short extract from a quite recent exchange in the US Senate, featuring a woman doctor and the US Senator called Josh Hawley. The senator asks the doctor if a man can get pregnant. The exchange is amusing, even if it is a small yet tragic demonstration of the direction of our current culture and of its general mode of thought at large.
Do you think that men can get pregnant?
I hesitated there because I wasn't sure where the conversation was going or what the goal was. I mean, I do take care of patients with different identities. I take care of many women. Yeah, I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Well, the goal is just the truth. So can men get pregnant?
Again, the reason I paused there is I'm not really sure what the goal of the question
is. The goal is just to establish a biological reality. You just said a moment ago that science and evidence should control, not politics. Absolutely. So let's just test that proposition. Can men get pregnant?
I take care of people with many identities, but
can men get pregnant?
Many women that can get pregnant. I do take care of people that don't identify as women.
Can men get pregnant?
Again, as I'm saying,
let me just remind you. You testified to a moment ago. Science and evidence should control, not politics. So can men get pregnant? You're a doctor, I think.
Science and evidence should guide medicine.
Do science and evidence tell us that men can get pregnant? Biological men, can they get pregnant?
I also think yes/no questions like this are a political tool.
No, yes/no questions are about the truth, doctor. Let's not make a mockery of this proceeding. This is not a hypothetical question. This is not theoretical. It affects real people in their real lives. And you're here as an expert, called by the other side as an expert, and you've been telling us that you follow, right, you're a doctor, and you follow the science and the evidence. So I just want to know, based on the science, can men get pregnant? That's a yes or no question. It really is, I think.
I think you're trying to reduce the complexity of a lot.
I'm not. I'm trying to get, it's not complex. I'm trying to get to an answer, and I'm trying to test, frankly, your veracity as a medical professional and as a scientist. Can men get pregnant?
I think you're also conflating
male with... No, I'm not conflating male and female. They're two different things. There's biological men and there's biological women. And I want to know, can men get pregnant?
What you were talking about is biological.
You're not going to answer my question, it sounds like.
Biological males.
This isn't hard, doctor. Can men get pregnant? Yes or no?
I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you that is not coming from a place of trying to be polarized and push.
I'm not trying to be polarizing. I'm trying to ask. I think it is extraordinary that we are here in a hearing about science and about women. And for the record, it's women who get pregnant, not men.
Is there a link to Shakespeare in all this? I think there is, and probably Shakespeare himself would agree. In the play Timon of Athens, Timon, the protagonist, referring to the rottenness, dishonesty, and deprivation of his so-called friends, says, "Much of this will make black white, foul fair, wrong right, base noble, old young, coward valiant." Of course, you, patient viewers, will be the judges. Thank you for watching, and may all the number of the stars give light to your fair way.